One. What's happening, everyone? Welcome into another edition of Final Whistle. As I'm your host, Blaine Spencer. With me, I have Kevin Davis. He is a big-time sports bettor. He does a lot of sports betting for American Betting Experts. You may know him as BoogieDownPicks. He works for VegasInsider, American Betting Experts, and the Sportsbook Review. Kevin, thanks for taking some time out of your Friday to come on and talk some sports betting with me and some sports in general.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Blaine.
No worries.
Starts with a B, ends with an E.
Exactly. No worries. I have three first names, so it gets botched. I get called Spencer, Patrick, Blaine. It goes all the way around. But Kevin, I just want to get your overall input, how you got yourself into sports betting and what is your little niche to understand the game. I know it's still very difficult to figure out. I still struggle with it. So just give a little bit of background.
Yeah, so obviously here in New Jersey, now a New Jersey resident, we've only had legal sports betting since May, well, not May, since the May Supreme Court decision in 2018. They developed retail sports betting in the summer, and then the fall that year, they went ahead with sports betting apps. So I was sports betting since slightly before that. Basically, I was living in the Bronx at the time, hence BoogieDownPicks, Boogie Down Bronx, BoogieDownPicks. There's also a rap group, Boogie Down Productions, same initials. I thought it sticks. I'm kind of a good self-marketer. So I was betting at the time at my barbershop. Obviously, I need to go there. So I was betting at the time at the barbershop because it turned out that they also took sportsbook in the bets in the back. And I'm like, this is interesting. So I didn't know any Spanish, but I go on Google Translate to get my bets in. And then that's how I started discovering, betting on sports games. But before that, I was, betting on horses occasionally because I have family that works in the racing industry. So I'm familiar with that. But horse racing betting's fun, but the house has a extremely big edge because they have to pay for all the horses. Whereas the sports books, they don't have to pay for the sporting events. People do the sporting events, and then they do whatever the hell they want. The NBA, all the leagues, they want an integrity fee, but the sports betting operators don't need the league. They can do whatever they want. That's essentially was the rationale for legalizing it because people are going to bet on it anyways. The government might as well make some money. So I come into sports betting because I previously had a career in politics. I was once an elected official in Westchester, moved to the Bronx, then I worked for the government. And just like how the guy who created the advanced baseball statistics, Bill James, was a security guard at a pork and beans factory. I went from taking 311 calls to writing about sports betting. So I write articles about sports betting and then I make the picks myself. So that's much different than taking complaints from inmates at Rikers Island or taking heating complaints from New York City residents. So that's why I moved. I was tired of taking the PATH train to New Jersey all the time. So that's why I moved here, so I can just do it in my living room.
Yeah, I mean, that's a heck of a journey transitioning from politics to sports betting. I mean,
yeah, it's much different too, because luckily sports betting is more analytical.
Yeah.
Although politics can be analytical too, but the thing with politics is you can be right and have data, but people are going to ignore the data because of their opinions. Mm-hmm. But sports betting, if your data is wrong, you're going to lose money.
Yeah.
In the long run.
Yeah, and for you,
any idiot can make money at sports betting in the short run.
Understandable. And for you, how do you approach either your stories, depending on if you're going to give a story that's giving advice on games, or if it's depending upon how you're going to beat the house, etc. What's your angle that you usually try to take?
So you want to look at two different things. You want to look at what you think is going to happen compared to the odds. You also want to look at the types of bets where they have a small house advantage. So in the beginning, like for example, Canadian football was one of the sports I bet in the beginning, which is a great sport, a lot of fun to watch. But because it's a novelty sport, the holds were a little bit higher than usual. You would have like minus 114 on each side. Mm-hmm. So, that's more of a house edge debate. One great thing about the small sports is less money's being bet on it, so lines are less efficient. That's why people don't write about it, because people aren't betting a lot of money on it and there's not a lot of interest. But if someone's an up and coming sports bettor, the best thing they can do is find a sport or an area of a major sport that most people don't look at and focus on that. So I look at, angles of the game that most people aren't looking at. You're not going to be able to win on NFL unless you have an angle. So for example, this year, the idea is you want to have as many sports betting accounts as possible. The shop lines have the lowest house advantage. So this year, for example, if you bet on team field goals or total field goals and combine, for example, BetMGM, the Canby book, so DraftKings, Sugar House, 888 Sport, Unibet, Bet America entered this into soon. If you combine them, you can have it where you randomly pick a side of the over-under on a field goal amount and expect to make money, even if you don't know what you're doing. So Sugar House, which was one of the Cammy books, I really hit hard on some of their field goal props and others. The next thing you know, they were limiting my bets, and they won't tell me why. And I assume that's because of that, as well as, college basketball is hitting them hard on too. So they won't let me get down more than $12 in college basketball anymore on Sugar House for the most part.
Why do you think, why would a sports book start regulating your bets? Is that just because you start to pay out more than they want you to?
I mean, they're a business. They want to make money. I'm a bettor. I want to make money. So, I think from the sports book angle, they see that someone's kicking their butt and they don't want them. Now, I personally disagree with it. They should say, okay, this Kevin guy is smart. We should just copy whatever he does. Maybe set some limits that are reasonable, not like $12.12 or $2.77, like on the Giannis Antetokounmpo rebound prop, because I also have an NBA player prop model. That's the best way to do it. Say, okay, we're going to take your action, and then we're going to use it to say, okay, we're going to shift the line. Because really, sports books claim that they want equal action on both sides, but it's frequently lopsided. Like there's certain teams that whenever they play, they're going to get lopsidedly bet. Lakers, Brooklyn Nets, etc. I mean, the only exception to the Brooklyn Nets is if they have an injury. So, so that's one angle. I look at the most inefficient markets in terms of the hold. I also look at betting history. So, for example, NFL player props, I found that particularly for running backs, if you blindly bet the under just on Bovada for the last 3 years, you would have had a positive return of about 17%. And that's because running backs, A, get injured all the time. B, they have to share the ball with other running backs. And C, people love action. They want to see overs. So people keep betting the over, they adjust the line. And then that's without line shopping. So you can shop for lines and get, 4 or 5 yards, there. Sometimes you can take two books, like let's say one player is at, most of the books have him at 83.5 rushing yards. But you find one book that has him at 81.5. Find another book that has him at 88.5. Bet the under 88.5. Bet the over 81.5. If it doesn't fall between that range, you lose a little bit of money. If both bets win, you make a lot of money. So that's, that's known as middling. So that's certainly something you can do with NFL player props, passing yards. I'm excited for live game player prop betting. I think that's a huge opportunity to really cook the sports books where it hurts. Like in the Super Bowl, I was able to get it at the second half. Pat Mahomes, over 270.5 passing yards, under 300.5 passing yards, like the live line, just by shopping site to site. He was at 270 passing yards, and then he threw an interception. So that would have been an epic middle. Obviously, it was a great game. Most people lost money. I can't really complain because the Super Bowl, there was hundreds of bets, and they found a lot of inefficiencies. So I hit those inefficiencies hard. The biggest inefficiency I found for the Super Bowl this year was on sack props, as well as tackle props. So,
and why do you think the Super Bowl ends up putting out so many more different prop bets than in a regular game? Is that just because that's the only real thing that's being on at that moment?
Yeah, people are going to watch the Super Bowl and they're going to put a lot of money down. And these prop bets tend to have a higher hold percentage. So from their end, they're going to make more money. But, you look at it, they don't just focus on one thing. They're focusing on many things. So if they get one thing wrong, you hit them, where they got it wrong. And then even if they got it right, what if somebody else has it wrong? And you can combine the two together and then lose money in the long run by betting both sides. So they have a tough job for the Super Bowl, certainly. I think they probably make money on the Super Bowl. They made money this year. They did really well because Tampa Bay won. Everyone was on the Chiefs.
And the over. Everyone bet the over extensively heavy. I think it was over 85% of the money I was reading was on the over, just because everyone thought the game was going to be so close.
So, people love betting overs. Look at the player prop overs. Tampa Bay scored a ton of points. Tom Brady went under his passing yards.
Yeah.
It was incredible. He was floating at around 302, 301 and a half passing yards up until game day. One site had him at 290 and a half. But then 2 hours or 3 hours before the game, they upped him to 305 and a half. So people were pounding that over. That's why they were adjusting it. And if you're a savvy bettor, you can get some good bets in, without even looking at the angles and coming up with models, because I have models as well. I don't have a football model. You can just, by going site to site and seeing the biggest differences, find the best markets to target your bets. So the best thing you can do as a sports bettor is find the best markets. And then the second best thing you can do is know the sport. But most people think it's knowing the sport. And then by knowing the sport, you want to look at the key statistics. So if it's basketball, you want to look at pace and adjust everything for pace. At football, you want to see, what happens, especially college football, what happens when the game is basically over and there's 20 minutes left on the clock. Teams are going to change their tactics. So college football, you want to see how certain teams react when they're up by 20 points. And football, what makes it a great sport to bet, but not as so good to model, is the sample sizes are small. So you're really making a determination over 16 games. It's not baseball where you have 162 games. Or even last year you had 60 games, but that's still much more than not virtually every sport. It's more than NFL.
Yeah.
They play every day. It's slightly less than NBA and NHL, but that's why these other sports are good. College basketball is good because you have all these teams, so you can find some outliers. Especially if college sports, if you look at the news, look to see which players are out, try and analyze, their impact on the team. Look at some advanced statistics that nobody else is looking at. You don't want someone scoring a lot of points or the high field goal percentage. You want someone who has, a positive offensive win shares. Like, for example, Victor Oladipo right now, people think he's hot. You look at his advanced statistics and he's having one of the worst times of his career since he got to Houston. So look at the stats that matter, not the noise.
Yeah, and then for you, do you vote for especially college basketball and college football? The momentum is such a huge part of those games, and in college football, you could be down 20 and then you're within 6 minutes of a game, just because of how quickly in collegiate sports momentum changes. Does that become a factor to you whatsoever either, or no?
I think momentum is overrated. You have a team of all these players, and all these players got to do one thing or another. So there's going to be variance. There's going to be wild swings. But ultimately, you put players on the field. They're all trying their best. Bowl games, I would say momentum may be a big deal because that's our last game of the season, and they're not going to get yelled at by the coach in practice the next day, so they stop giving a hoot. But for the most part, you put them out there, they're going to play their best. Maybe the coach will change their strategies, so you want to look for particular teams. Basketball, you want to see which teams throw the towel in, or which teams say, you know what, we have this really good player, but they don't give him enough minutes. We're going to put him in garbage time. So I think momentum's a little overrated. You still want to look at the fundamentals of the team.
Understandable. And for you, what's the sport that you enjoy most betting on? For me, it's college football, just because that's probably the best knowledge I have, and I go way more in depth with the analytics and the statistics more than anyone. I think that's also because I follow it a little bit more. I also write for covering college football. So what's for you? What's your go-to?
Well, college football is my number two because it's just hard for anyone who's really smart to beat. And it's all about reading the news and looking at trends, the right trends, not the crappy trends.
Yeah.
Such as this team covers the spread 17-1 when the coach wears purple underwear. You want to look at something that actually ties to the result. So, you want to look at this team mainly runs the ball. How is the other team on rushing defense? This team runs a triple option. Have they played any triple option teams recently? Because the triple option is one of those weird things where it's either a team gets it right away or a team doesn't get it right away, but they're not going to make halftime adjustments. If they don't know who's getting the ball, how are they supposed to stop the person getting the ball? Or let's say a team has an air raid offense, and the minute they step on the field, they get suffocated. Are they going to stop getting suffocated? So college football is good because of all the research you can put in. You can look at recruiting rankings. You can look at beat reporters. But my favorite's baseball. It's not my favorite to watch. It's slow, especially when the game's out of hand. But you can quantify every player much more easily.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have pace. Every team has the same number of outs to win the game for the most part. You have the lineup order. And you can put the players in the lineup and say, okay, if this team were to put out this lineup and pitching rotation that they're putting out today, how many games will they win for the full season? What about the other team? That's how my model works. I put each player in and account for injuries and say, okay, if this team is a 55% winning percentage team that they're fielding today, and the other team is fielding a 40% winning team today, how often does the 55% winning chance team win? And then I can convert that to an odds. I compare to the best odds available. And if I see an edge, I'll bet on it. But usually as the season goes on and I get more data, I have fewer good bets to do because everybody else has the same data and the odds are more efficient.
Understandable. And
but usually I find myself betting for underdogs because I think I'll wait for the line to shift. People keep piling on the favorites. They want to take that Yankees minus 170. And I'm a Yankees fan, but they're terrible to bet on because they're over bet. So you usually never get a good value on them. And I hate the Red Sox, and sometimes they're a good bet. Like, I only care about one thing, winning bets.
Yeah, and I know we've worked together for American Betting Experts on some stuff. And for you, how often do you always want to try and go for that big underdog payout, especially when the odds are really substantial and it's a very good payout if you put in like plus 250 odds or better? How often do you try to go? What's your approach to that?
My approach is the same for every bet, whether it's an underdog or favorite.
Okay.
If you go in an odds calculator or you do the math in your head or on a calculator and factor in what percentage of the time does this bet need to hit in order for me to break even? And is the chance of this happening greater than that percentage?
Mm-hmm.
So for example, let's say a team has a 40% chance of winning and they're being offered as minus 110, like toss up. That would be a bad bet because minus 110 means their break-even odds are about 52.4%. Now, what if you have a team that you give a 55% chance of winning and they're being offered at plus 110? Then you have an edge.
Yeah.
Although you should check because that would be a little bit bigger than you should have.
Because then there might be something that Vegas knows that you may not know at that moment, correct? Sometimes.
Well, I think what Vegas knows and what the betting public knows is something else. Some people say, okay, this team has lost 8 in a row, and the other team has won 4 out of 6. It doesn't matter that the team on the losing streak has a better pitching matchup. We like the other team. Sometimes, and this is why I like those Asian baseball leagues, especially the Taiwanese league, because for Taiwanese baseball, the relievers are so awful. And the lineups are a little bit mixed. So if you can get a starter, the starters are much better than the relievers, particularly because the starters are mainly the foreign players. So if you can get a starter that pitches 1 or 2 more innings than a typical pitcher would, that gives you more of an edge when you factor in the bullpen.
Yeah.
And of
So
course, the fielding is atrocious too. So it'd be great if I can get fielding statistics for that. MLB, I can get fielding statistics. I'm incorporating them in my model this year.
are
In
there
my
so
projection.
in that league, is there over unders on the errors?
No, but there should be. Um,
That
I
would
think
probably be
people
a
would bet
heavy
on it.
over for you then, correct?
Although, um, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens to the future of those sports now that there's other sports on.
Hmm.
But the sports betting apps like having live video of the games. So it is a market they can cultivate for the people who want to wake and bet.
Yeah. And then transitioning to the parlays, how often do you try to parlay? Do you avoid parlays? I know for I know for me, I usually throw in one maybe a week. I try to stay away from them just because of I know that I'm the one that always goes like 4-1 if I'm on a 5 parlay, and then I make nothing off of it. So what's your advice and approach to parlays?
So my advice most of the time is not to do it, but there are some instances when you do it and it's not what you think. So the reason why parlays have a bigger house advantage than just a single bet is because every single bet that you bet on has a house advantage.
Yeah.
So you're taking multiple bets with with the house advantage and multiplying it together. So you're taking a small bet and you're increasing your volume, and that's why they have a big advantage.
Yeah.
So, but here's the exception to the rule. Sometimes they offer a good parlay promotion, and if you can quantify it, sometimes it's basically the same negative EV as a single bet, or sometimes positive. The other instance, which you won't make much money doing, but you make some, is a lot of these sites have pre-made parlays, or pre-made parlay boosted promotions.
Yeah, those
So they
odds
set this
boosts that
the
some of
night
them do.
before,
Like,
and then there's an injury announcement a couple hours after that. Well, they don't change the odds on the pre-made parlays. So you can put in, what the changed odds are for every single leg of the parlay and say, is this, different than what's being offered? And say, okay, I have an edge. Because since the injury news, it should be plus 200, but it's still plus 350.
mm-hmm.
So even though that's like a $25, $50 maximum, that still would be a good play. So if you're looking to do a parlay, my best advice would be to look for ones where it was made before the odds changed.
Mm-hmm. And then what has been the best play that you've ever had and been able to land? It's up to you if you want to talk about it.
What
What
do
has
you
been
mean?
your best bet in your opinion that you've been able to hit?
My most profitable bet, my best edge.
Either or, whatever you prefer.
I mean, I had an incredible pitcher strikeout prop run last year, where I was embarrassed to put up my record because it was so insane that I thought everyone would think I was lying. So, like, that's why I don't like giving my record, because if you're losing, you suck, and if you're winning, you're full of crap. So you can't win. It's just, how should I say it? It is just like the Kansas City Royals, you can't win. So basically, pitcher props last year, and like I said, you want to look for a low hard market, and if you don't have that, you want to look for where there's something that hasn't adjusted properly. So last year, the biggest thing was the starting pitchers were pitching fewer innings. So the best pitchers, they would set the strikeout total as if they were pitching 6 or 7 innings, but they were going to pitch 5 to 6, so it was set too high. But if you took the worst pitchers, they still were going to get their 5 innings, and sometimes you can get a strikeout total of 3.5, and you take the over, and you hold your breath. So that's one efficiency I found. College football this last season, I had some insane underdog money line wins, like Liberty in the first or second week, or Louisiana Lafayette against Iowa State in the first week, because essentially there's going to be more variance this year. I figured because of COVID. So you don't know how often these teams are practicing, how often they're tackling in practice because they have to be socially distant, as well as the fact you don't have much information on these teams. So how close to a spread are you going to get on these couple of weeks? And then you get into November, December, where usually the college football lines are harder to beat, but you had like Big Ten, SEC, Mountain West, where you had teams that only played 3 or 4 games up until that point. So you had a small sample size, so you still had some variance. But basically, your best bet's always going to change because the odds are going to adapt. So your best bet is to say, okay, I have a theory, look at historical data, test it out. And then after you look at the historical data, say, okay, what markets are associated with my theory that have the lowest house advantage? So just in case I'm wrong, or just in case I'm average, I'm not going to lose that much money.
Yeah, and then for just for the example, I know you mentioned Louisiana Lafayette beating Iowa State. For you, did you take notice that Iowa State always starts the season relatively slow? Does that impact how much more confidence you have in that bet, or does that not really quantify into what the bet ends up taking in?
Yes, that's a good question. So I factor that in somewhat, but that's like misleading because you still have a small sample.
Mm-hmm.
But what I factored in is sure, the Sun Belt is a worse conference than the Big 12. But
I mean, the
one of the
Sun
best Sun
Belt
Belt teams,
dominated the Big 12 this year, ironically.
but one of the teams in the Sun Belt that was going to be at the top was going to be Louisiana Lafayette. And they had a fighting chance to win. They probably weren't going to win, but they had a chance to win that was being underrated because Iowa State, Big 12 school with an NFL prospect quarterback. And they're playing at Iowa State, although not in front of any fans. So, that's why I'm not going to do the spread I don't remember what it was, because sometimes teams just like lay an egg and don't cover the spread, or they just win.
Yeah.
Or sometimes they'll do half a unit on the spread, half a unit on the money line. So, certainly level of competition matters in college football, but people kind of overvalue it in these non-conference matchups. Or you have a situation a lot of times where you have an awful Power 5 team play a strong Group of 5 team, and then the awful team wins. Because that's one of the games they needed to win in order to make a bowl. Because they were only going to win 2 conference games, so they have to go 4-0 in their non-conference league.
Yeah. So, because for me, when I'm diving into especially college football, I mean, that's just my niche. I always try to understand what's the historical data. Because teams that finish strong, you can almost assume that they're going to get better at the beginning of the year. So I always try to take notice of, hey, they're a little bit of a slow starter. It's happened 3 out of the last 4 years. The roster is relatively the same. So I might not take like the underdog on the spread on the money line, but I would take them on the spread just because, hey, you guys are a team that start out relatively fast. You're competitive. You're mostly competitive. Your team, usually your point differential is constituent based off of that. And then the team that starts off slow, their point differential stays relatively closer in comparison to the spread. So those are some different ways that I look at it. I know so that's just my personal approach.
Yeah, which sometimes is good, but on the other hand, Arkansas State, for example, they beat Kansas State this year, and Arkansas State used to be awful in non-conference play.
Yeah.
And then strong in Sun Belt. This year they were the opposite. They were strong in the non-conference and they fell flat in the Sun Belt. So
I avoided that
you have
game
to be
anyway.
that's like the problem of having such a small sample of anything.
Yeah.
You don't know if it's like a trend or you don't know if it's just noise.
Exactly. So before I let you go, Kevin, I want to ask you, why don't you talk about the class that you've actually just started up in the past couple weeks? If you wanted to
Well,
give a little bit of a shout out to that.
I didn't start the class, but I am doing some YouTube videos with Jason Radowitz where I go over some like sports betting tips, and not like tips on what games to bet, but on how to like make the picks yourself, how to actually be profitable. So if you go on YouTube and subscribe to the Level Up Sports Betting channel, that's where you can get more information. But essentially, we're going at the things of how to decrease the house advantage by shopping for lines, and we go through the math. How to convert odds into a probability, or how to understand what the odds mean. But essentially, like things that you shouldn't overlook that a lot of people do because they get overwhelmed. But if you actually take the time to learn about it, it's actually fairly easy. It's just tedious.
Yeah. And the videos are great. I've watched a couple of them. You two are doing great work. I'm
Oh,
being
thank
completely
you.
honest. So you guys are doing great stuff there. I mean, I don't know if you have any picks for the weekend. Do you have any quality picks that you have for this weekend or not at the
Not
moment?
at the moment. I'm working on my baseball model. So I'm going to have some picks for Sunday because I have a
Okay.
college basketball article coming out. But in the meantime, I'm refining my model to include fielding statistics as well as this year's player projections because the Pacoda ratings came out for Baseball Perspective last week, so I'm incorporating that in there. There's going to be some surprises this year, as there always are. But from what I have so far, the odds have been pretty accurate for most teams. So right now, my process is I determine how many games each team should win based on how many runs each player will score and how many runs the pitchers will give up and how many runs they'll give up by fielding. Do the Pythagorean theorem,
Yeah.
the Bill James Pythagorean theorem to determine how many games they'll win. I'll have each team's winning percentage, and then I, put in the schedule in my model to say based on their schedule how many games should each team win.
Yeah. And then
So
do
from
you
that
use
number, I'll compare it to the win loss futures. I might even be able to derive some probabilities of winning the division from that.
That's awesome. That's that's some great stuff on it. And for you, do you for your rough game winnings and totals, do you end up trying to simulate each game one by one, or do you just try and get it more of a general number?
Well, for the full season totals, um, I just have like the number for each team.
Okay.
But I'll put in this team's playing, the Mets are playing, for example, the Miami Marlins X times. What percentage of the time should they win, and how many wins would that equate to? So let's say it's like 4.4.
Yeah.
And then you add up all the numbers and say, okay, the Mets number should be this, but it's this, rather than just saying, okay, not taking into account the Mets schedule, how many games should they win? But that's
Okay.
tricky right now because the schedules could change. You also have to keep track of what's going to happen with the DH. I'm under the assumption that there is going to be a DH this year because the players want it. And why wouldn't the owners want it? Because let's face it, no one wants to see someone who doesn't hit. They want
No one
action.
wants no everyone's tired of the sacrifice bunt. So
If you score runs, the fans will show. And how do you score runs? Designated hitter. So it makes business sense. It makes playing sense. Cheng Ming Wan, he ruined his whole career as a pitcher because he was hitting. He pulled like a leg muscle running the home.
yeah.
So what's the point? I know there's tradition. Baseball's a little obsessed with tradition. They don't like players showboating and throwing the bats. I love throwing the bats. I love people who do dances. That's one of the reasons why football is fun. Um, and then pitchers, will because there's so many unwritten rules. I just like the written rules. I want to see something entertaining. So I'm under the assumption that they're going to have a DH. Obviously, I can adjust it if there is going to be a pitcher hitting. But we shall see. The players and the owners are going to keep fighting, and we have to keep an eye on whether there's going to be a strike eventually. Maybe there won't, maybe there will. But right now there's some inefficiencies in the baseball market because the teams don't want to pay the players what they're worth, and the teams also can't afford to pay the players what they're worth. So the players are doing the rational thing, which is trying to make the most money possible. You can't blame them, and the teams are trying to get a competitive edge over the other teams by signing them. But it's unsustainable for teams to win. So I don't know what's going to happen. For baseball to really survive, they need gambling because you don't want to wait 25 or 30 seconds between pitches. But what if you have a player prop? What if you bet on the next batter to be out or have a hit?
Yeah, because there's a bunch of player props on next pitches sometimes too, or
So
sometimes
that would
like
be interesting to kind of get play-by-play data to develop a model for baseball. Live betting, that was one of the first models I created for NBA. It was simple. say, okay, if a team is favored by 4.5 points and they're down by 5 at halftime, what percentage of the time do they win? Or what should the spread be? And then compare it to what's being offered.
Yeah.
So it's like a do-it-yourself model. Obviously, you can be more advanced and give different weights based on games that are more recent or particular teams. But that's the smartest thing you can do is come up with a good number. But even smarter than coming up with a good number for live betting is having 8 apps open at once and going app to app on your phone and finding where the inefficiencies are. Because most of these apps copy each other, but there's not as much time to copy each other in a live bet. And you also only want to do it at a commercial break. Personally, I only like to do it at like a quarter or a half break because then you have the time. Because the sportsbook has data feeds that are faster than TV. So they know more than you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it all correlates to based off of how quick and how much everything changes. Because I feel like, especially with sports books, they try to hold a line, but then they'll jump it a lot higher than people and estimate based off of how much money is being put down or how much money hasn't been put on one side of the margin span. I think that's what people really get confused about sometimes. They're like, hey, this was just a 280. Why is it all the way up to like the Tom Brady bet, for example, 290? Why is it all the way? Why did it go up 15 to 20 yards in like a 6-hour stretch? So, and I think people need to try and understand, hey, that means there's been a lot of money put on over the 290, and so much money was put up. They're trying to see if they go up higher, will people continue to bet the over, or will they subjugate it down and then meet a middle spot around like 295?
Yeah, that happens too. Sometimes they'll say, okay, this guy's really smart. So even though most people are betting the other side than the smart guy, we're going to move it in favor of the smart guy because we trust the smart guy.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes they do that too. So you have to look at both sides of the coin. These sports books will claim they want equal action, but they're gamblers too. They're just doing it with an edge.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And most of them, because of their marketing budgets, are losing money right now anyways, because they're giving out free promos and running TV ads. So in addition to actually being smart at betting, you can be profitable just by, doing low risk bets and nothing but promos.
What's your take on promos from when they're offered? What's your take on that? Do you take advantage of them, or you usually shy away unless it's an advantage to you with after you go into analysis?
So there's professional bettors that'll say, I never do promos because I'm a professional bettor, or the promos are too little money. Then there's people who are, sharp but not professional, like me. I would say I'm sharp but not professional because I don't make my living off betting. I make my living off of writing, but I actually bet the stuff I write about. And most people who say they're going to make their money betting on sports are full of crap because if you get good, they limit you, so you can't really make any money off of it anyways. So let's be real. So the promos, for example, I'll calculate them sometime. So DraftKings, they're not offering it this season yet, but they had this promo last year for certain games. Bet a team's money line. If they score 110 points or more and they lose, get it back as a free bet. So I took my historical data and said, here's how much it would pay out if they win. Here's how much it pays out if they lose. And of course, factor in the free bet if they lose but score 110 more. And then you took that free bet, you bet it on the spread, and your expected loss from betting on the spread. And what I determined is just betting on underdogs blindly would have a positive return. So even though it was a $25 minimum, I just said, okay, I'm going to do this promo, bet every single underdog money line $25. And of course, it's a better return when the totals are higher and you have an underdog.
Yeah.
So I did that strategy, and it's painful because there's one game, Brooklyn Nets, Milwaukee Bucks, and the Bucks were favored by 17.5 or 18.5 points, something ridiculous. It was the Nets in the bubble, so they didn't have Kyrie Irving. Obviously, they didn't have Kevin Durant, another Kevin D. They had like nobodies.
I don't even think
But
Levert played that night either. The one I know exactly who
Levert
you're
was
talking about.
out. Yeah, he was not in the bubble.
Yeah,
Um,
Levert was out injured that week. I think he got hurt in the middle, right before the
yeah.
playoffs started.
So I was like, okay, gonna do $25 Nets money line plus 1,400. I think the best price was like plus 15 or plus 1,600. Actually, no, I got it plus 1,500, but I could have gotten it for another site without the promo for plus 1,600. I'm like, okay, you know, I'll probably get this back as a free bet. And the Bucks play relatively up tempo, but they have one of the best defensive efficiencies. So if the score gets out of hand and they put their worst players in, you know, they'll score 110. Well, to my shock, the Bucks realize they don't need to care about home court advantage in the playoffs because there's no fans. And the Nets players were actually trying, and I think they won by like 3 points. And that $25 bet was, a $375 profit. So, that's a promo. It's not like the ones where deposit 100, get $100. Those are the best ones. But still, I, was methodical. I said, okay, I'm going to do the formulas. I'm going to calculate how much it is. But here are the promos you want to avoid. So Fox Bet, for example, they'll offer a bet boost. And you look at the boosted odds. First of all, they don't even give you the option of no usually.
Nope, they don't.
And then you compare their boosted odds to other people offering other ads offering odds, and it's actually not a boost. It's like those commercials where it says you can get this TV once $49.99 for $400, and they find out the Target's selling it for $300. So that's what Fox Bet does a lot of the time. But you want to keep an eye on them. Sometimes they offer something reasonable. So you want to break down the numbers. If something has a rollover requirement, like deposit $200, get $200, and you have to bet it 6 times to get your money, you still have an edge because you say, okay, $200, that's gonna be 400, and then you multiply the 400 by 6, that's 2,400. On average, you lose about, if you're line shopping, for example, and doing baseball, on average, you'll lose about 2%. So 2% of 2,400, just off the top of my head, is $48. So you're losing $48 and you're getting 200, so you would net 152. So that's a good deal. But the sports books are doing this because they want to have engagement. They want to go to their shareholders and say, hey, listen, we have all these new signups. And look, we give these people money and then they lose it all because they're chumps. So, they want you betting parlays. That's why they offer parlay promos.
Yep.
Only do the parlay promos, like I said, if you have that edge where they don't change the line. Or I know a couple people who are sharp, believe it or not, they'll do parlays because the sportsbook thinks you aren't sharp if you do a parlay. So they combine a bunch of their bets where they normally would be limited in a parlay.
Beating the system the hard way.
But if you're, just someone who's looking at basic stats, taking a couple seconds to look at the game, don't have a model, then parlays are going to lose more money because it's multiplying the edge.
Mm-hmm.
But, for most people who are so-called recreational bettors putting $20 down at a game, if they do recreational betting smart and only bet $20 a game on money lines, let's say for baseball, that $20 should be an expected loss of 40 cents. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty damn good entertainment for 40 cents, I would say. Or, if you're doing the spread, sometimes one site will offer minus 105 when most others are offering minus 110. Or you'll get an extra half point, which is more likely. Or sometimes a full point if they're going completely crazy. And, a full point in college basketball, if you get a close game, could be worth about 18 cents, meaning it should be at minus 118 when it's even money.
Yeah.
So, just by being smart at shopping for lines, not even being smart about the sport, you can really, be a dummy and not really lose that much money.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, I want to thank you for your time on your Friday, taking some time out of your evening to come on Final Whistle and chat it up with me. If you guys haven't yet, go follow him at BoogieDownPicks on Twitter. be on the lookout. He's going to have a story coming out on Sunday, correct? Sunday is when you're going to have a nice
Sunday it is.
Sunday. He's going to have a little bit of college basketball. And if you guys are diehard baseball fans, he's working on his little setup that he's going to have for you to be able to dive deep into Major League Baseball and help you make some money. So be on the lookout. Follow him. Kevin, again, thank you for coming on. Appreciate it.
All right. Talk to you later, Blaine. Pleasure being on.
Everyone have a great day. Enjoy your weekend.